Hello, everybody. I think we're live. I really appreciate this opportunity to come back to the collective and see some friends from the community here who were around the last time. Hi, Wade. Good to see you. Hi, Nicolette. And I'm really glad to see you. Hi, Dream Aloud. Hi, Adam Brown. Nice to see you guys. I am in kind of a unique space within online communities. I consult with a lot of different organizations that do online kinds of community setups. I've probably worked on a couple of dozen over the years, ranging from small discussion forums up to large enterprise kinds of applications. With a lot of integrations and a lot of custom developments. So I feel like I've kind of seen the big and the small and the pretty and the ugly. And I'm really pleased for opportunities to come in and talk to other practitioners and learn from you guys, as well as offer some of the things that I've seen over the time that I've been involved with online communities. And I think I really got started in earnest with online communities back around around the year 2000 is when I started participating regularly in online discussion forums. But then, of course, social media came up, and I think when I started doing actual consulting within this space, it was maybe around 2011 or so. But really enjoying working within online communities because first of all, it's just a lot of really nice people that work in our space. Most of us, I think, are by nature pretty outgoing and interested in learning and interested in networking with each other. We get digital platforms, and so the kinds of communities that we start tend to be pretty thriving ones over time. So I've worked in a couple of different consultancies around online community building and digital workplaces. But for the past 5 years, I've been running my own company, which is Clocktower Advisors, clocktoweradvisors.com. And I continue to work with small startups, local companies that are in my backyard here in Wisconsin in the United States, and with global companies around the world. And I've had clients in Germany, the UK, New Zealand, Australia, really kind of all around, all over the place down in South America. And I really enjoy the international perspective of getting to know different people that are in the space. So I'm curious about everyone's experiences with the analytics that you're tracking using Disciple. But I'm here to share generally my experiences with other kinds of platforms, and if you guys had seen the bullet points for the event here, I'm going to be talking about, and I've written them down so I don't mistake. So if you see me looking off camera, that's I'm looking at my screen here. Differences between metrics and KPIs, differences between reporting squirrels and true analysts, what most platforms or dashboards provide and maybe what they don't. Metrics that businesses generally want or think that they do, and then getting started sorting noise out of your metrics, for your stakeholders. So just wondering also how many folks from the audience here are in more of a corporate setting, or if you're more individual practitioners running your own individual communities. Maybe in the course of talking here, you may want to just chime in and tell me what your own situation is as we go, and I'll keep an eye on the stream and we'll respond as I see some of those things. But why don't we go ahead and get going here? Some of the items that I wanted to talk about, I guess to start with, making making some distinctions between metrics and key performance indicators, KPIs. So a lot of times when I talk to organizations, or if I set up an online community or given them a strategy for getting engaged with their customers or their employees or whatever the case happens to be, I am talking to a leadership team, and they're interested in very different things than what a individual community manager may be interested in seeing. So there's, and we may call them different things, but I would draw a distinction between your day-to-day metrics, or I've heard them called your community health metrics, that kind of say, how's the community doing? Are there people logging in? Are they using the platform? Are they active with it? Versus your key performance indicators. And so those key performance indicators, there might just be one or two things that you care about in terms of your business. Did this person convert to become a paying customer for your product or your service? That may be your key performance indicator. Or it may be people who have signed up for a particular cause or event that you're working on right now. So it's definitely something to look at. Hi, Melikas. No, I think we're gonna hit this with the basics. So I think it's absolutely appropriate that you're here. Beginner questions are just as welcome as more advanced kinds of questions. I'm gonna try to cover this from the top down. So, but basically, the idea that we would want to track, your community metrics. That's something that I care about as an individual practitioner running my own community, to see how I'm doing. And as the saying goes, what doesn't get measured doesn't get improved or changed over time. So it's extraordinarily important to have a plan for tracking how your community efforts are going. And I know that, and I've seen the dashboard that Disciple provides on the back end, so you can see the number of registrations for your community, what the monthly active users look like, what kinds of things are going on in the community. And I think these are all pretty important and pretty regular sorts of things you see. But again, I'm drawing a distinction between, at a high level, the kinds of metrics that you're looking at to see how you're doing day to day, how you're doing month to month, how healthy the community itself seems to be, versus the things that actually got you involved with the community in the first place. So that means defining the why of your community. Who's it for? What do you want them to get out of it? And usually when I'm working with customers around a community strategy, it's a two-part discussion. One is you need to be thinking about what your members need out of that community, as well as what you need out of it. And there's going to be some overlap, between those two things. If you ever studied logic in school, you've got the idea of the Venn diagram. There's kind of an overlap between the two circles. And what's between those things are the things that you really want to focus on for your community goals, and the things that you want to figure out how you're going to measure those sorts of things. So getting to the why of why are you doing this in the first place is extremely important. There's a client I was working with here in Wisconsin, great group of people. They wanted to set up a community as a follow-up space for further discussions beyond a webinar series they were doing on COVID. And so they were doing kind of a weekly update to people, within their geographical regions, so kind of a geographical community they were looking at, to be able to continue to engage, people within the space. And my question to them was, well, I understand why you want to do it, because you want to have those people involved, and they may be potential customers for you. But what's in it for them? Why would they come to this community that you want to create past their webinars? You need to be able to spell that out for them, why they need to be there, and what's bringing them there. And then you need to be able to track how well you're doing at communicating that based on activity that's going on in the community and the kinds of things they care about, the kind of things that they do, the extent to which they're sharing with each other and connecting. And so this idea of community metrics goes back a long ways. One of the more influential pieces of research that was out around 2009 was by Iriberry and Leroy, who created the online community life cycle. And the idea behind that is that communities start up from scratch, and they need to get off the ground and reach a level of critical mass. So they need to grow, and to grow they need some rules, they need content, they need to provide a sense of identity for people who join that community. In other words, I need to identify with why I'm in that community. And over time, communities grow and they mature, but then they also can die if they're not nurtured, if they're not created in a sustainable sort of way. And so tracking that information is important, and metrics are an important piece of that as well. And so one of the things that Iriberry and Leroy talk about is the difference between quantitative and qualitative metrics. So not only are we worried about sort of like what's the big goal, what's the why you're trying to achieve, and how are you going to measure that as a key performance indicator, and not only is it your community metrics and how healthy is that community over time, how's it doing, but it's also the kinds of metrics that you're tracking. And so I looked, within Disciple, and this is pretty much across the board for any of the community platforms. So they're tracking almost entirely quantitative metrics, and that's what they can track. They can count the numbers for you, and that's great, and it's important. But I would encourage you to keep in mind both the qualitative and the quantitative side of things. And so by qualitative, what I mean by that is, what are the stories that you've accumulated over time that underlie the reasons why the community exists? What is it that gets people fired up about being in your community space? And that may be a series of anecdotes. Somebody was helped at a time when they really needed it. There was a quit smoking community that I was helping some years ago, and for them, like their qualitative measure of success was somebody saying, because of this community, because I was able to get support when I was craving a cigarette, this community has literally saved my life. I mean, what kind of more amazing sort of testimonial can you get than that? Than the fact that the social network that you've created for people that need help actually saved somebody's life. So anyway, some things to think about there in terms of the types of metrics that we're collecting and what it is that constitutes success. Those quantitative and qualitative metrics are important, I think, especially if you're in a corporate reporting environment, where if you've created your community as part of a larger team, when you've got sort of a C-suite of executives who you need to report to, or a champion that you need to report to help them understand if the community is working or not. You need to be able to bring them both kinds of metrics, both the hard numbers to show that the community is performing well, as well as some of the softer kinds of measurements of success, the success stories. And my experience is that executives, they want to see the numbers, but what truly moves them to underwrite or pay for a community platform is the emotive quality of a community. In other words, what kinds of visceral reactions people have to being a part of that community in that space. Were they able to help solve a problem for that person? Was that person able to offer an idea that was then turned into a better product or a better solution? Were they able to connect with somebody else in the community that was able to address some need that they have? Often, what I do when I'm tracking my qualitative metrics like that, I've got a spreadsheet or a document or someplace where I am just literally grabbing those stories. Like if somebody wrote a testimonial on some comment on the site, I'm screen grabbing it, dropping it into an Evernote file or a Word document or a Google Doc, and collecting all of those stories for later. And something else to think about when you're collecting those kinds of stories. Those are things that maybe you can go back to the user and say, hey, could I interview you about this, and turn it into a bigger story? Then it becomes a more fully blown kind of testimonial about the site. Or maybe you could even get permission to use the quote on the front end of your website or your Facebook page, or wherever it is that you're promoting and getting people into your community from, where you can list some select quotes from people that are active in your community and encourage them to come in based on the testimonials that they can see somewhere on that landing page. So really some good opportunities to use those qualitative kinds of metrics. So I'm going to get a little bit into some of the specific kinds of metrics or measurements that I've seen within online communities. And so some of the stuff that I've seen with Disciple, I've certainly seen in other places too. I generally divide the kinds of metrics that I'm looking for between activity and growth. And full credit, I derived that approach a lot from some time that I spent with Richard Millington of Feverbee. And I think it's just kind of a nice way to sort of keep these things distinct. In terms of growth, you want to make sure that your community numbers are growing over time. And so you're looking at things like how many visitors are hitting my website, or finding out about my community in some way, whether it's through an email newsletter or a website or whatever the case happens to be, a live event. How many people are visiting or being exposed to messages about that community? And then how many are becoming registrants? How many register to actually become a member of that community over time? I'm interested in the ratio between the two of them, because if I see a big fall off between visitors and actual registrants, I know then maybe my onboarding message maybe isn't as powerful as it could be, or maybe there's a problem with my registration process. Maybe I'm asking too many questions. And I expect, Disciple's actually pretty easy to get signed up for something like that. So, I'm sure they've been thinking a lot and carefully about sort of that registration process and onboarding. But if you haven't got a really crisp, compelling story, excuse me, about why somebody should join the community, you may see that drop off between that visitor to registered ratio that's in there. And then beyond that, getting people into the community and sort of tracking that number over time, you're also going to be interested in seeing where are they coming from? What are your best sources that are coming from that? And maybe Google Analytics is giving you some data around that, whether they're coming from social media sites, whether they're coming from other websites, referrers, from other kind of backlinks that are leading them to come into the community and find out what that's all about. So those things are definitely worth tracking. But then, so that's the growth side. And then the activity side is certainly what people are doing, once they're in the platform. And then, I think we can then divide, the kinds of things that are happening within the platform among different kinds of users. And so by that, I mean, if you guys caught my earlier stream about a month ago around lurkers, that's the majority of the people that come into your platform are going to be lurkers. It's the 90-9-1 rule. 90% of the people coming into the platform are probably going to be just looking around. Maybe they're coming back on a regular basis, but they're not ever going to be posting or contributing. I love lurkers too. Woo, yay, wait. But the opportunity to engage those individuals, some lurkers can be engaged, some can't. But then you've got your occasional contributors, and then you've got your regular contributors. And as a community manager, I'm always trying to figure out which lurkers can I get to maybe post about something, and which occasional contributors can I maybe get to become more regular contributors over time. And because the general idea is, and a lot of the research that's been done around this, again, going back to the 2009 article was really seminal by Earberry and Leroy on online community life cycles. It's the greater level of activity that's happening in your community, the more likely it is that people will form strong ties with one another. So you want to be able to move people along that spectrum. Payment definitely helps engagement too. It's funny, you mentioned that pardon me, there's a community practice that I work with. I've been an advisor for them for a couple of years now. And the people that actively participate in that platform they're actually receiving grants from the foundation that's running the online community for these professionals. And and in fact, the people who are their super users or their ambassadors in that program, they're receiving a stipend, to do that. It's like part of their teaching duties. Then it becomes because they're getting part of a grant out of that, but they're actually getting some of that in their own pocket. So some communities can definitely have the luxury of having some paid contributors to really kind of help supercharge engagement. Yeah, so Oliver Byrne says, I try to measure how many people I can move through the 90-9-1 stage, especially from lurkers to participants. Absolutely. And so thinking about the kinds of behaviors you want to drive and how you make that go. Yeah, I think I would like a grant too, please. Thinking about the kinds of things that are gonna provoke their interest. And one of the ways you do that, like looking at the lurkers and even your occasional contributors, is to see that, pardon me, I'm losing my voice today already. Not a good sign for the rest of the broadcast. part of the way of moving those guys from being lurkers to regular participants, or from readers to leaders, that's actually a framework that's been called, is figuring out what topics they're most interested in. And so tracking, over time, where you're getting the most response, where you're getting, the posts with the most attention, and really doubling down on the things that seem to be getting a response. The lurkers who are likely to eventually post are maybe subject matter experts in some area, or they've got a trigger issue that they really care deeply and passionately about. And so maybe figuring that out when somebody comes into the community for the first time, if they have filled out their profiles, and again, that's another metric we want to look at, profile completion. Looking at how we really engage them and encourage the behavior of posting is something that maybe requires some individual tracking of members in your community, especially if you're starting from scratch. Actually keeping a spreadsheet, naming the members of your community, what their interests are, or maybe how they've engaged, or what they seem to have responded to as you're going in. That's the heavy lifting, in the early days of any communities that you work through. So, Malika, that's awesome. Yeah, I think figuring out creating your community based on hot button issues and seeing where the interest lies. That's the key to really getting people going. So I was starting to get into some of the dashboard items that are important, and really that difference between what I call reporting squirrels versus true analysts. I've taken that from, and I don't know if anybody has read any of the work for an evangelist of metrics by the name of Avinash Kaushik. So Malika asks, is there a way to download the community members into an Excel spreadsheet? I don't know. That's maybe something Nicolette can jump in on and answer. That's something I would certainly be interested in seeing, but sometimes that's a little tough to get out of community platforms. Awesome, that's great. So yes, there is a way to do that. Avinash Kaushik is one of my idols. I've followed him for years. He writes a blog called Occam's Razor. And I think he was with Google at one time. I think now he's really more in a university setting. Does a lot of work with clients, and is really an insightful guy about metrics. And one of the things that I love about him is that he's really kind of a specialist in Google Analytics. And the problem with Google Analytics, like so many analytics platforms, is they give you just a boatload, a kitchen sink full of different metrics that you can pull, and it's overwhelming. If you've never tracked metrics much before, if it's new to you, it can be overwhelming to look at those kinds of things. So I will say I really appreciate the way that Disciple has set up a pretty simple dashboard just to kind of get people going. No spoilers, but I hear that there's some updates that may be coming in the future here. But ideally, you want to be able to really hone in on the metrics that are most important to you. So usually when I'm talking to a client, I'm recommending tracking for community health, maybe no more than 12 to 16 metrics total that I'm looking at. And even those, the ones that I really care about are the community growth metrics of who's registering, who's logging in regularly, who are the active users on a monthly basis, and then what kinds of contributions we're seeing on a regular basis. I've been through the GA cert process too. It is kind of crazy. And Google Analytics, like a lot of community platforms, especially some of the more entry-level ones, don't necessarily even have much by way of metrics on the back end, and you have to depend on Google Analytics to figure out what's going on. And so kind of creating your own dashboard or your own approach to that is really the way to go, but that's tough to do. It's time-consuming, and you've got to kind of feel your way around and know what you're doing. So, I mean, Google's Google Academy, I guess they call it, their free training is pretty good, but as Adam said, it's kind of crazy, all the different things that you can do within that process. Anyways, Avinash Kaushik talks about reporting squirrels versus reporting ninjas. I didn't want to be totally stealing his act, but I'm giving credit where credit is due. He is a neat guy. I strongly encourage you to check him out. But again, that idea of really being highly critical about the metrics you're reporting, and especially to your executive team, if you've got an executive team that you're going for, you're working with, that you are accountable to. Really limiting the number of things that they have to look at. Like pull it up to, the 30,000, 40,000 foot view, so they can just kind of see how's the community doing. And in my experience, that's usually something that your leadership team is looking at is, how am I comparing to other kinds of communities that are comparable to this? They're looking for benchmarks. They're looking for ideas how that works. And it is possible to see some kinds of common measurements of community or some kind of metrics around that. You can get some of that information by going, for example, to the Community Roundtable. And if you guys don't know about that as a resource, Community Roundtable is an amazing source of annual research they've been putting out for over 10 years around online community building, both internal and external communities, some internal like digital workplaces, as well as external. They do some really wonderful stuff. The data that they pull is, I think, an industry standard because nobody else is really doing that deep research around how communities are performing, and so they can provide you with some benchmarks or some background ideas around that. So Oliver says, I marry community data in platform activity with Google Analytics, which gives me traffic and behavior. Fair amount of work, but it lets me tell a more complete story. Absolutely, here. I think as you get into greater depth and detail around the kinds of metrics you're looking for from your community, you may not be able to get them all in one place. In fact, more often than not, I find that the community platforms themselves, the metrics they provide aren't necessarily everything that I need. So I am often looking for a feature to be able to export some of those analytics to maybe a third-party reporting tool. Something like Tableau, which can give you some rich data visualizations and adjustable dashboards with data sources from more than one place. So I don't know, Oliver, what you're using in particular, but being able to pull data from Google Analytics and being able to pull data from your community platform and marry the two together, as you say, I think can be extraordinarily powerful. But again, I'll counsel you to avoid the temptation to do a kitchen sink approach to that. So that's awesome. Anecdotal feedback is super important. So the other piece of this, sorry, just missing a notification there. The other piece of this is just making sure that you're not over creating the number of reports or visualizations that are there. I worked with a client that had hired a data analyst to put together reports from them. We had started with some of the basic metrics that I had recommended, and they started working with the reporting analyst. He's a great guy, very talented. Was able to pull things into Tableau and give some rich visual representations of what was going on with the data. But he ended up with over 100 reports at the end of the day, and I ended up having to go through and do an audit and say, nope, we don't need that one. Nope, we don't need that one. Nope, we don't need that one. It's better to be critical or put a critical eye to these things on the front end and not overwork yourself. That being said, one of the things that I'll mention is that looking at data for trends, over time in communities, while it's maybe interesting to look at how many registrants that I have today, it's maybe exciting as a community manager to see how many new signups you've had, new people logging into the community every day, your daily active users, weekly active users. I really don't find that I start to get to insights until I start looking at monthly kinds of metrics. And so most of the dashboards that I look at, I am very interested in seeing things on a month-to-month basis and how that's all working. And very often I am working with organizations where the platform only lets me look back a certain number. Yeah, I think the monthly and quarterly is where I'm getting the most out of it, Wade. Absolutely. The daily, weekly, I don't sweat any of that. In fact, I don't even sweat the monthly unless I see some kind of trending over a couple of months with that kind of information. Um, one of the pitfalls that I see with platforms with some organizations is that they just really don't have a really good way to peel back data over time. So it only lets you look back, much like Facebook does. You can look back for maybe 30 days at a time. Actually, Facebook's gotten a little bit better at this. You can only look back 30 days at a time, and so if you missed the beginning of the month, you can't tell how many people you had over the last 30 days. If you're a couple of days beyond, then you're kind of trying to do some math in your head around it. So having some ability to look at the previous month's metrics, or being able to compare month over month metrics for comparison, being able to look at maybe last year over year metrics for comparison to see how you're doing. I think those are important kinds of things to be able to get at. So what I'm frequently doing is setting up a spreadsheet so that I can just pull up that information, because the platforms themselves don't always make that easy information to get at. And at least being able to specify that I'm looking for my July metrics, or I'm looking for my August metrics. I'm only looking on a month-to-month basis, and it's difficult to compare if you've missed the first of the month. You're on the 5th or the 6th of the month, and you're trying to figure out what the last month's metrics were, and compare the month before that when you did have a full 30 days. It's just better if you can either export that data entirely, or you can specify it within the platform itself. So that's usually the biggest shortcoming that I come across, within the platforms, as far as being able to track metrics or give you a dashboard. They usually provide you a really pretty interface that's nice. Oliver asks a great question. How do you approach turning metrics into hard ROI type discussions? That is a big one. I will say, like, some of the best things that I've seen around ROI discussions came out of Feverbee. Rich Millington has actually a good, I think it's free to the public, an e-course or an e-book around determining ROI. So he had built out a lot of that. Hi, Niv, good to see you. He had built out a lot of that over time, and has some good thinking about initiating those discussions and expressing ROI as a percentage. So I think he spent some time with a quantitative analyst to work out some of that information. Frankly, I think it comes back to my earlier points about key performance indicators. There's probably one or two things that your leaders or your executive leadership is looking for that are the determinations of success for them. So many of the organizations I've worked with have been unable to articulate what they meant ROI to be. And it can be different things for different organizations. The ROI for a not-for-profit organization, for example, might be fulfillment of its mission. How can they tell if they fulfilled their mission? Well, if there are certain conditions being met. For a large activist organization that I worked with, it's global, that you would recognize, their return on investment was being able to have a ready group of volunteers. So they were looking to create capacity for volunteerism and activism by having an online community that regularly engaged people that were interested in their brand and what they did. For them, those numbers, being able to see that there's a certain number of monthly active users was the ROI question for them. For other organizations, it's sales of widgets, or it's customer loyalty kind of measurements. And there's certainly been a lot of research done around building customer loyalty and some of the antecedents to that loyalty and the kinds of things you can do in a community to make that happen. So that's a fantastic question, Oliver, right? I wish I could get a little more specific, but I think it gets down into the specifics of organizations when we do that. The other thing, by way of benchmarking, for executive leaders too, that I often bring up is the ability for a given community to establish a sense of community among its members. And this was something else I had picked up from Oh, you bet, Oliver. Something else I had picked up from Richard, some years ago, and I still believe that it's, I think, a highly valuable, set of metrics. I don't know if any of you guys have ever heard of the Sense of Community Index. There's something called the Sense of Community Index, Part 2 or 2. If you Google it, you'll come across it. But this is a validated survey. It's been validated for both, regular live communities as well as digital communities, and it asks a series of questions that you have to keep in order for it to be validated. You could front load or back load additional questions on it, but it asks a series of questions on a Likert scale. So this is kind of a 4-part scale from I don't agree at all to I really agree with this. And you can apply it as a survey to members of your community. And some of the questions that you would run into on this, I have it pulled up here, would be, so it asks, how well do each of the following statements represent how you feel about this community? So a few of these are, I get important needs of mine met because I'm part of this community. Would you say not at all, somewhat, mostly, or completely? Second question is, community members and I value the same things. So they're looking for affinity in the ways that people like each other. Or this community has been successful in getting the needs of its members met. How is it at solving people's problems? And again, what happens is that you get a survey or you do a sample of your community because you don't want to exhaust people with surveys. And you can take that information and you can kind of break it down into how engaged they are with the community, if there are trouble areas. And what I really like about this particular survey, and I've seen it broken down in such a way that you can actually prescribe specific kinds of actions for your community manager based on how the survey goes. And I've had one client where we've actually run the survey, I think, 4 times now, and we've been able to see consistent changes or improvement over time as far as how people were engaged with the community and their sense of happiness or completeness as an effect of being part of the community. So definitely would encourage you to look into that as something around your community. Before I forget, Oliver, you had mentioned, I had mentioned Feverbee as one of the places to look for return on investment conversations. I don't know if it's still up there, but back when Chorus, Khorus, was lithium, they had some good materials on return on investment as well. And the guy that ran that practice, for them around strategy, he had actually a fairly complex formula around that he was able to figure out. But I do remember the headline from him was that it's difficult to attribute sometimes engagement within the community with a hard number of sales and success, but you can maybe demonstrate a relationship between the two things. And so maybe often for most executives, being able to demonstrate that relationship is enough. Good. Glad you like the Sense of Community Index, Adam. Yeah, I've used it to good effect with other organizations, and have definitely worked with some data scientists on it, and they seem to feel that it's a pretty well validated instrument that you guys can use. So I'd say then that the other kinds of things, getting started sorting out the noise, from the noise metrics from what stakeholders actually need. That's going to come down to having some heart-to-heart discussions with your leaders, and it all depends on where community comes from. If you're coming at it as an individual, just kind of running your own grassroots community, the only person you have to please is yourself, and are you getting out of it what you need to? I would say at that level. What you should be doing is probably writing down for yourself what those goals are for your community, what you're trying to achieve, and then what kinds of things you could track to be able to convince yourself that you are indeed achieving those kinds of things. It gets a little more complicated in an enterprise or a larger organization where you may have to convince some executive leaders that the community is what they need, or they may have some very divergent ideas about what community is. You may need to do a little level setting with them so that that you have a shared understanding of what they care about, and that you can provide for them reporting in language that they would use, and that's really important around going to justify their further investment in the community. And so as a community manager working at a larger company, having that sense of what your leaders are actually looking for, what they care about, and there may be different needs at different levels of stakeholders in your organization that you would need to track in order to determine if that's the right way for you to report back to the rest of the organization how things are doing. Your product development area of the organization may only care about ideas that are showing up in the community and how many ideas are coming through, how many can be actively applied and used to create a new product or service. Your executive leadership, however, may be looking to establish some level of customer loyalty. And so they may be looking for opportunities to provide special offers or behind the scenes discounts for things. And if they're not seeing those things, you may have trouble getting your budget approved for next year to keep that community going. So sitting down and having some frank discussions with people around your organization, if you are in a startup or if you're in a larger kind of enterprise situation, really important. It is somewhat simpler if you were just kind of running your own show and trying to show success, but I do think you still need to be just as ruthless with yourself about demanding results from how your community is doing. And there are some organizations and some community concepts that just shouldn't continue because they don't have a good answer to the why that it's there, and they haven't maybe examined that closely. Maybe they haven't talked enough to their members to find out what those members are looking for, and maybe they haven't validated against the internet what kinds of competing communities are maybe out there. And I mean, if you may have an awesome idea for a community, but if somebody else has already done it and it's a successful and thriving community, why are you trying to create another community like that? You should either be trying to add something that's totally unique, or else join up with that other community and lend your efforts to them. Maybe offering some financial support for what they do. So those are just some considerations to go through. I am kind of curious. So what are your experiences? Like, how many of you are using the Disciple Analytics dashboard right now? And what's working for you? What's not? What are some surprises that you've run into at this point? I'll just kind of let you guys think about that for a minute. I will say some of the metrics that I've typically looked at. I had mentioned growth metrics and activity metrics while you guys mull over that. On the growth metrics side, I'm looking at things like the number of new visitors versus the number of new registered members, and so there's a percentage or a conversion that I may be looking at around that. And then I'm looking at total members. Now, total members is one of the things that maybe your executive team is going to be asking for because they have an expectation that you go from 0 to 100,000 members in 3 months. That's a notion you need to disabuse your leadership of. So Nicolette says, I'm trying to concentrate on the stickiness factor, so monitoring the month-on-month active member return rate. What do you think? Is this a key indicator? Yeah, I mean, I think it is as far as being able to see, people returning to the community and that they're interested. That's certainly one of the key performance indicators that the community is sticky enough that people want to return. And one of the things that I've liked about the collective is that I do get notifications, when new stuff hits, or sometimes I get an email notification about things if I haven't been in a while. So I think that it's a neat platform for that. So being able to pull people back into the platform is super crucial. There's some things you can do to make that a little easier. When people have signed in new to a platform, I'm an advocate for having some kind of onboarding drip email campaign that maybe over a course of 4 or 5 emails delivered over a 2-3 week period. I'm reminded about hey, you joined this community and here's some neat things that are in the community. Here's a digest of some recent conversations that are going on that we think might be of interest to you. Hey, did you know this is what the community is all about? Just reminding people what the purpose of the community is, because it's easy to forget. I probably like you guys, I join a lot of different communities, and sometimes I find myself wondering, okay, why was I in this community again? What was I doing here? Sometimes it's a customer, but sometimes it was just something that was interesting to me, and I was following it. So so it's a great question, Nicolette. I think that's definitely, monthly active members is important. It is a question of what you mean by active, though, and that mileage can differ depending on the platform that you're working in. Does it mean that they're just merely logging in? Does it mean that they're logging in and visiting at least one page? Does it mean that they're logging in and doing something, which may mean like they've updated the profile, they've liked something, they've commented on something, they've shared something? Is that active, or does that mean they're a contributor? So, like, understanding the definitions of what those levels of activity are is something that's worth questioning a little bit further too. So that onboarding journey is definitely essential, Nicolette. Yeah, I'm glad that it's there, and then on the back end of that, especially if you're new to community management, doing everything to stack the deck in your favor, like greeting newcomers when they come in, or having some other super users or ambassadors who are in your community reach out and maybe send a private message of welcome. That's super important in things like healthcare communities, where people need to feel like they're being nurtured or welcomed. And so the quit smoking community that I mentioned earlier, the people who were the ambassadors or the super users in that community, anytime somebody joined new, they were watching for new joins, they would send out a welcome message, like a private welcome message to everybody coming in. And then too, I know, Nicolette, within this community, I think you're regularly welcoming newcomers, even publicly, which I think is awesome. It's a way to get them to come in and be active. I think those personal greetings are incredibly important. I'm just launching a Slack community for entrepreneurship here in Wisconsin, and a lot of the users who are coming into that community are total newcomers. They've never worked with Slack before, maybe even never worked in a collaboration platform before. So I'm excited to introduce them to what's there, and as soon as they come in, Slack's actually really good about giving me a notification when somebody's in new for the first time as an admin. I can see that, and they've actually got some canned messages to welcome newcomers. I like to do a personalized message and mention them by name if I can, but there's certainly, if you're inundated by a large number of new users, that they've made it easy within that platform to do some of those things too. So so the personal greetings, mentioning newcomers to the community, maybe even thanking them for coming and asking them to say hello, encouraging them to take the stage, really important. I think a lot of the research has shown that if somebody hasn't said something in the community within the first 48 hours or so of joining, they're not as likely to actually post something going forward. So maybe getting them to post something sooner than later, or to take some action like update their profile sooner than later is really important. So Nicolette asks, have I had much experience tracking sentiment within communities, and if so, are there any tools I'd recommend to do this? I have never seen sentiment tracking in any of the community platforms that I worked in. That might just mean that maybe I haven't seen it, but I haven't seen it as a priority around that. I do work with social listening platforms. I do a fair amount of work with a tool called Brand24. Not that I would necessarily recommend that as a tool. I think it can track sentiment in things like discussion forums, but I don't know that it can necessarily see inside of a walled community, something that's private. And I'm not sure what, if any, tools are designed to do that. And I will also add my level of skepticism about how good the algorithms are at determining sentiment. My experience with sentiment tracking is a little jaded, and because I've looked at a granular level about how things get rated good or bad, and depending on the topic, algorithms are just lousy at determining context by and large. Now they're probably getting better at it over time, just through the application of machine learning and AI, But there's still the other problem with that is who's programming the algorithms and those things. There is a kind of a cool, interesting guy. He goes by Damien. He is a university professor, and he runs a email newsletter called Technocult. I've been following him for years. He's kind of an acquired taste, but I think he's amazing because his specialization is talking about race and gender bias in algorithms that are built in. So that whole idea of sentiment tracking, I'm a little skeptical of that being super useful either. So Nicolette says, I'm agreed with the hesitation. I don't personally track this, but I've heard it come up a couple of times with internal and corporate communities. Yeah, I mean, they want to track that, but yeah, I think your mileage is going to vary. Yeah, Adam says he uses Brandwatch. I'm a little familiar with that. And it wouldn't be the first thing that I would care to watch. I might look at it as a curiosity, or to see if there's really, like I would say a high volume conversation on a trending topic, like if it was a social justice issue or something like that, and I knew that there was just a flurry of activity around that topic, I might be interested in tracking sentiment and seeing how that's tracking over time. But I just had so many cases where, like if I'm tracking for a healthcare community and somebody's tracking something like cancer, the algorithm is rating that as a negative, and it's just the topic, and it's a difficult topic. But how do you track sentiment around something like that? You would need some way to train the algorithm to know, in this particular case, that's a neutral term instead of a positive or a negative term. So cool stuff. Anyways, and again, that question of activity, I think, is the one that is really key. And you want to be able to move people from merely liking or sharing content to posting original content or originating discussions, or responding, with comments to discussions. And I know, certainly things in social media platforms like Facebook, they're favoring things that are engendering conversation, rather than simple likes, which is a super passive engagement tactic for people to get. Really easy to like something, but it's a lot tougher to really get something happening around it. So, wow, my apologies, my phone is blowing up here. So anyways, I think we're coming down to the end of the hour here. I hope that my rambling had a couple of interesting pieces of information for everybody. And if you want to engage in any further conversation with me about your specific community's metrics, I would be happy to do that. So please feel free to connect with me via LinkedIn, or I'm also findable on Facebook, and yes, I do use that for business as well, or Twitter. And here, let's not forget, here within the collective as well. So I'm active and monitoring whether people have posted to me. So I am really glad to be back in the community again. Hopefully I can come back for some more conversations in the future. Nicolette and Benji, thank you so much for inviting me back in. And with that, I think I will conclude the broadcast and thank everybody who came in to attend for the great questions and energizing discussion all the way around. And I learned from you guys as well. So have a wonderful day, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the collective.